The hum of the filtration vents was steady, almost soothing, as I worked through the final rows of the compliance renewal checklist. The lab smelled faintly of ethanol and burnt coffee, a combination that always reminded me of deadlines. My cursor hovered over the certification tab when the door swung open. Richard Hale burst in like he owned the place, his polished shoes squeaking on the sterile floor. Tucked under his arm was a French bulldog dressed in a miniature lab coat, complete with a plastic badge that read Chief Morale Officer. The researchers froze, unsure whether to laugh or to keep calibrating equipment. Team Richard announced, flashing a grin that belonged on a billboard, not in a restricted zone. Brand culture matters. Science can be serious and fun. He set the dog on a counter that had been sterilized only an hour ago. My jaw tightened. "Come on, Evelyn," he called across the room. "Scoot in for a photo. Compliance is just paperwork anyway. Don't act like you're curing cancer." His words rang out, casual as a joke, but sharp enough to slice the air. Laughter from two interns rippled nervously. I felt the eyes of the room shift toward me. Before I could respond, my screen blinked. An email notification slid into the corner. Subject line: license renewal action required. Deadline 3 days. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open beneath the desk, masking my expression. The automated reminder was direct, unyielding. Without my signature, the lab's operational license would expire. Not a guideline, not a suggestion, a hard federal cutoff. 3 days. Richard's voice kept echoing in my ears. Compliance is just paperwork. I looked at the dog perched on the counter, wagging obliviously, and then at the interns, snapping photos. Richard was already rehearsing hashtags in his head, not noticing the quiet tremor he had set loose beneath his empire. I said nothing. My pen traced a note in the margin of my checklist, deadline Sept 18A, M. I underlined it twice, then closed the folder with deliberate calm. Richard waved his hand as if dismissing a nuisance and strutted out with the dog. The room exhaled. I straightened in my chair, eyes on the clock, already hearing the faint tick of consequences counting down. The next morning, HR would summon me into a small, windowless office. The next morning, I was called into HR, a beige office with a humming space heater and no windows. The representative, a young man who still stumbled over the company's acronyms, clicked through his screen with the detached calm of someone reading from a script. "Per executive directive," he began, "your schedule is being adjusted from 35 hours to 28, effective immediately." He looked up with a polite smile, as though telling me my parking spot had moved. I kept my face neutral, though inside the words settled like stones. 28 hours, not 30. Not enough to qualify as a full-time compliance officer under federal regulation. In a single stroke, Richard had stripped the company of its only authorized signatory. I asked the HR rep for documentation. He looked puzzled. "It's just an adjustment in payroll," he said, shrugging. "Nothing changes day to day." His ignorance was almost comforting. He had no idea that what he dismissed as clerical trivia was actually the fuse to a bomb. I accepted the printed notice, initialed the acknowledgement line, and walked out without a word. Back at my desk, I slid the paper into my locked drawer and made a duplicate for my records. Dates, times, signatures all preserved. Compliance was about evidence, and I was already gathering mine. Around mid-morning, Richard strolled past my cubicle, sipping his iced latte through a compostable straw. He leaned casually against the divider, eyes glittering with self-satisfaction. "It's just vibes. Evelyn," he said, tilting the cup in mock salute, "don't take it personally." Then he was gone, leaving the faint scent of peppermint gum and arrogance in his wake. I turned back to my monitor, pulled up the renewal dashboard, and stared at the blinking field where my name had once been valid. Now it was grayed out. unauthorized. Richard thought he'd clipped my wings. He didn't realize he had cut the parachute strings holding his empire aloft. That evening, alone in my apartment, I marked the deadline on my calendar with a thick red pen. 3 days remained, and the countdown had already begun. That night, as the red circle on my calendar glared back at me, I found myself drifting into memories I hadn't visited in years. After my husband died, the nights were the hardest. My son would be asleep in the next room, a lamp left on so he wouldn't wake in darkness. I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop, spreadsheets glowing, compliance logs piled high beside unpaid bills. The hum of the refrigerator was my only companion. While other parents tucked their children into bed and rested, I was memorizing policy clauses and double-checking audit entries to make sure no federal inspector could shut down the lab that paid for my son's school lunches. I gave up a promotion once operations manager. It would have meant more travel, more time away. I chose stability instead, staying in compliance where the hours were brutal but at least predictable. I told myself I was doing it for my son, for the house we could barely keep, for the chance he wouldn't feel the same uncertainty that haunted me. There were crises, only I remembered the missing certification I corrected at midnight before a grant review, the chemical log error I caught seconds before regulators walked in. No press releases, no applause, just silent relief. I patched holes no one else saw and let others take credit for smooth sailing. Now, years later, sitting under the glow of a kitchen lamp, I realized nothing had changed. I was still the invisible patch, but now the company treated me like a spare part, disposable. My hours slashed with the stroke of a pen, my work dismissed as just paperwork. I stared at the deadline scrawled on my calendar, the ink heavy and final. A quiet resentment hardened inside me, sharper than grief, steadier than anger. If they wanted to see what compliance really meant, I would show them by simply stepping back and letting the system speak. When I arrived at the office the next morning, my decision was already made. By the time I reached my desk, the decision had already settled in me like stone. No more late-night fixes, no more saving them from themselves. From now on, I would do exactly what was required and not a fraction more. I began by organizing a file on my encrypted drive. I labeled it plainly, Our Reduction Directive, number 1837. Inside, I stored the HR memo, payroll adjustments, and the timestamp showing the moment my eligibility as a compliance officer was revoked. I added copies of pending renewal forms and flagged the missing files that had been ignored for weeks. Every gap, every unchecked box documented. Evidence ages better than memory. While gathering logs, I stumbled across something buried in the shared drive Richard's quarterly investor presentation. A bold slide proclaimed 100% compliance, zero deficiencies. He'd stood before shareholders, bragging about spotless records. My stomach clenched. The data he showed was my data, except it wasn't. Half the reports were outdated. Vendor licenses past expiration, audit trails missing signatures. He had lied. The discovery should have lit a fire in me, but instead it cooled me to ice. Richard hadn't just mocked compliance in front of interns, he had gambled the company's reputation on falsified confidence. One inspection, one regulator with sharp eyes, and the whole facade would collapse. I closed the file without a word to anyone. Confrontation would only invite gaslighting, excuses, or threats. Silence was cleaner, sharper. I didn't need to shout the truth. It was already coded into the system, waiting for anyone who cared to look. And when the deadline passed, there would be no erasing it. That afternoon, Richard breezed past my desk, still riding high on investor praise. He gave me that smirk of his, the one that assumed he'd already won. I kept my face neutral and slid another printout into my drawer. the evidence pile growing heavier with each page. By evening, I felt the shift settle fully. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was recording, observing, waiting. The system itself would deliver the verdict, and I was prepared to let it speak. The countdown ticked louder when Marcus appeared at my desk the next day. The conference room smelled of reheated donuts and stale coffee, the usual camouflage for something unpleasant. Richard stood at the front, sleeves rolled up, pastel slides flickering behind him like a bad motivational reel. He called it a culture realignment session, but the tension in the room said otherwise. Authenticity is our currency. One slide read in bubble letters, another synergy over silos. Colleagues shifted in their seats, nodding politely, eyes glazed. Then came the third slide. On the screen was a grainy still from the lab security camera, me, mid-step, blurry, captioned, "Resistance to culture." Richard's voice softened to something falsely sweet. "Some of us still struggle to embrace the brand narrative," he said, not naming me but leaving no doubt. A few heads lowered. Marcus avoided my gaze. I folded my hands on the table, heartbeat steady. "Can I have that in writing?" My voice cut through the room like a scalpel. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Richard blinked, his smile faltering. "Oh, sweet Evelyn, it's all fluid, non-linear, agile-based," he stammered, tossing out buzzwords like confetti at a sad parade. But the crack had already shown. He had drawn a line publicly, and I had quietly placed it on record. 10 minutes later, back at my desk, I opened a new document, Summary of Culture Alignment Session, 10:00 Room 4B. I listed attendees, quotes, the slide captions, the precise wording, resistance to culture. No opinion, no embellishment, just fact. I sent the memo to my personal encrypted email, time-stamped and archived. My phone buzzed. A message from Elise Hurd about the ambush. "You okay? Want me to review your employment clause?" I stared at the screen, the heat rising under my skin, but my expression calm. I typed back only one word. Soon. The evidence drawer grew heavier. The deadline inched closer. And then Marcus appeared at my cubicle, his face pale with unease. 2 weeks out. I sat at my desk long after the chatter of the office had faded, compiling everything into one place. I named the folder simply TikTok. Inside, I stacked PDFs of HR's adjustment notice, payroll logs, the compliance dashboard screenshots with my grayed-out credentials, and Richard's polished investor slides declaring 100% compliance. Every piece of evidence was neat, time-stamped, irrefutable. The clock was no longer abstract. I could hear it in the back of my mind, steady as a metronome. Sept 180 the exact moment our license would expire. I underlined it in red across my calendar, then opened the dashboard again, its warning field blinking soft and steady. That's when Marcus showed up at my cubicle, shoulders hunched like a schoolboy caught in the wrong class. He lowered his voice. "Richard says we can, just fudge the system. Add a name, backdate the signature. Nobody checks." I turned my chair slowly to face him. "Marcus, forging a compliance signature is felony fraud. That's prison, not just a slap on the wrist. Choose carefully." His face went white. He swallowed hard and muttered something about checking with operations before shuffling away. I watched him go, my own resolve hardening. Richard thought rules were negotiable. I knew better. That afternoon, I flagged the renewal in the system as pending no authorized signatory. The software responded automatically, escalating notices to legal, HR, and the executive board. I read each confirmation line, notice sent, recipient acknowledged, status unchanged, And then, silence. No one replied. I leaned back, folded my arms, and let the weight of that silence settle over me. The system had spoken. It would speak again when the clock ran out. Until then, my job was only to wait, watch, and record. 3 days stretched into 2 weeks. The air in the office grew lighter for everyone else, but heavier for me. I could almost hear the tick with each login, each time I opened the dashboard. And then, on Sept 1, at precisely 9:03, the ticking stopped. The morning of September 1st began like any other. I logged in, opened the dashboard, and stared at the flashing red banner, license renewal incomplete. My name remained grayed out. The clock had struck 8, and the system had done exactly what it was designed to do: expire. At 9:03, the elevator doors slid open with a metallic chime. A man in a navy blazer stepped out, badge clipped to his pocket. His presence sucked the air out of the hallway. He walked straight to the lab doors, opened a black binder, and announced in a voice that carried across the floor, "As of 8:00, ma'am, this facility's operational license is expired. All activities are suspended." Gasps rippled through the staff. 2 researchers froze mid-transfer, one holding a tray of reagents as though it might shatter under the weight of the silence. The inspector produced a thick red seal and pressed it onto the biometric panel. The lock clicked, a crimson light pulsing above it like a wound. Richard came striding forward, smile glued on, hand outstretched. "We can handle this over coffee," he said with a forced laugh. "No need for drama." The inspector didn't return the smile. "You've been operating illegally for 1 hour and 3 minutes. That number landed like a hammer. Behind me, I heard the CFO's voice rise from his office, raw and panicked. "Do you know this costs $1 million per day? $1 million. His words thundered down the hall, echoing through every cubicle. The room's eyes swung between Richard, pale and blinking, and me, seated at my desk with a paper cup of black coffee warming my hands. I lifted it slowly, took a sip, and let the bitterness spread across my tongue. The inspector began snapping photos of the sealed doors, each click a metronome of consequences. Around me, whispers hissed, chairs scraped, panic spread like smoke. I set the cup down, the ripple of liquid soft against the paper rim, and waited, because the next move wouldn't come from me, it would come from the boardroom. By mid-morning, the executives had vanished behind closed doors. The glass walls of the boardroom fogged with tension, blinds half drawn, silhouettes moving like restless shadows. My phone vibrated once, twice, then again, the caller ID flashing variations of unknown X'd, priority. I let them stack in silence. Later, I heard from a colleague what unfolded inside. The general counsel sat with a printed copy of the operating statute, glasses perched low on his nose. He read aloud, voice flat and steady. Licenses must be renewed annually by an authorized compliance officer, actively employed at no fewer than 30 hours per week. He paused, eyes scanning the table. Documentation must reflect eligibility at the time of signature. He flipped the page, tapping the clause with his finger. That's the law. HR shifted uncomfortably. Richard, red around the ears, muttered, "It's just 2 hours. 35. 28. What's the difference?" The general counsel looked up, no hint of humor. "You didn't just cut her hours. Richard, you disqualified her. There is no authorized signatory. That means this company has been operating without a valid license since 8 Silence slammed the room, thick and heavy. The CFO buried his face in his hands, whispering numbers that sounded like prayers. The COO paced, muttering about regulators and liability. Richard tried to bluster his way back, insisting the system could be patched, the error explained away. But the statute on the table didn't bend, and the red seal on the lab doors wasn't moving. Another call buzzed on my phone, then another. My screen filled with unanswered pleas. Please respond critical. We need to talk. Call back now. I let each one roll to voicemail, my hands steady as I sipped lukewarm coffee at my desk. Inside that boardroom, they were circling the problem like trapped animals. Out here, I watched the missed calls stack neatly on my screen, one after another, until the vibrations blurred together. By early afternoon, the messages stopped, and that was when I walked out, heading not to the boardroom, but to the cafe across the street. The cafe on Tremont Street was crowded with students tapping keyboards and tourists hunting Wi-Fi, but to me it felt like a war room. Elise slid into the seat across from me, a lavender latte in hand and her laptop already glowing with drafts. She didn't waste time. "We start with non-negotiables," she said, typing as she spoke. 40 guaranteed hours, full reinstatement of benefits, VP title Vice President of Regulatory Integrity. I nodded. Direct reporting to the board. No more getting filtered through Richard or anyone else. Her fingers flew. Independent compliance team. Your hires. Your budget. She looked up at me. Back pay for the months they cut you, plus whistleblower protections ironclad enough to hold in federal court. My phone buzzed again and again on the table between us. Emails stacked up. Please respond. Emergency session now. Critical, pick up your phone. I silenced the screen and typed one line back to them all. All requests through my attorney. Elise smirked. Nice touch. Keeps them desperate. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. I'm adding one more. They'll fight it, but it's the legacy clause. Funding for an independent compliance training institute, your design, your leadership. When you finally walk away, it stays behind and it bears your name. The words landed heavy, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about planting something they couldn't uproot. I agreed without hesitation. Outside. I could see the corporate tower across the street, blinds still drawn tight over the boardroom windows. Elise hit save on the draft, her expression sharpened by the glow of the screen. Ready to send, she asked. I lifted my cup, tasted the bitter edge of black coffee, and set it down. Send it, I said, and with a single click, the conditions of my return crossed into their inboxes. The boardroom was hushed when I walked in, Elise at my side and the contract folder under my arm. Executives shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between me and the red seal still fresh in their memory. The general counsel reached for the document first, scanning each page with quick, practiced precision. He didn't hesitate. His pen scratched the signature line, the sound louder than the murmurs that followed. HR moved quickly, sliding a fresh badge across the table. My name gleamed, Vice President of Regulatory Integrity. I clipped it to my blazer, the plastic still warm from the printer. Across the table. Richard shot up from his chair. This is absurd, he barked. She's leveraging a technicality. The COO cut him off without raising his voice. You're suspended pending review. He motioned to security. Richard swiped his badge at the door. Once, twice. The panel flashed red. His face drained of color as he realized his empire of branding slogans had just collapsed in a single blink. I opened my laptop, the familiar compliance dashboard waiting. With my reinstated credentials, the red banner finally lifted. I clicked sign. The system authenticated, processed, and turned green. The inspector's text arrived moments later, Lock removed. Access restored. Relief rippled through the room, but I didn't bask in it. Their applause wasn't what I had been waiting for. I'll remain for 30 days, I said evenly, long enough to ensure transition and to establish the Institute clause you signed. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and stood. After that, you won't need me. You'll need what I leave behind. As I walked out, I thought of the nights at my kitchen table, the sacrifices buried in forgotten spreadsheets, the years they dismissed as paperwork. They mocked it. I turned it into power and walked away with a legacy that would outlive their brand,